Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic loss of Air India Flight 171. My name is Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
It's a much nicer day today than it was yesterday, let me tell you.
You shoved the bad weather over here then.
Well, it's gone somewhere, but it's not here. So, viewers, we promised you that we'd come back to you with questions on our 171 coverage, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. And without further ado, we're going to get cracking. So, Papa Bob at 29 has raised an interesting statement or a question. He says, I saw a segment last night saying that British Airways is grounding a large chunk of its Boeing 787 fleet due to reoccurring and growing issues with early delamination of its structural carbon fibre hull skin section, plus lots of reoccurring and growing control system software anomalies and failures, including major false on-ground airborne detection failures, comments, question mark, possible connection to Air India crash. It's a pretty damning statement, Richard. You've investigated this one.
Yeah, thank you for that, Papa Bob. You don't say which report you're referring to. There have been several on British Airways Boeing 787 fleet, including a fake news report that they were selling off the entire fleet, which is simply not true. They're actually ordering more. British Airways has not grounded a large chunk of its Boeing 787 fleet. At various points in time in recent months, between 5 and 7 aircraft out of the fleet of 42 have been grounded. And that's mostly due to the pending Rolls-Royce engine repairs and engine replacements. And we pointed out in previous episodes that Rolls-Royce have an issue with getting engines and engine parts to their various operators. There are no reports of delamination of aircraft skin structure on the British Airways Boeing 787 fleet. There was a report in 2012 of structural stiffeners being poorly bonded. And in August 2020, Boeing voluntarily grounded a small number of recently built 787s, but not BA ones, due to manufacturing flaws in the rear fuselage junctions that risked structural strength below design standards. So don't know quite where those reports come from. There have been recently reports of issues with flap adjustment failures and the window dimmer malfunctioning. But that's got nothing to do with skin structure or delamination. There are no confirmed reports British Airways Boeing 787 experiencing any control system software anomalies or failures, and there's no major alarm on false on-ground airborne detection failures. There was an FAA warning in 2020 about software updates for the Boeing 787, but also the 777 and the 747. And there was a possibility of auto throttle cutting to idle and flight computer errors that could degrade safety. Now, there is also a report from a guy called Narendra Singh from Delhi in India, and he published it in LinkedIn. And it seems to be an article appeared at exonerating the crew of Air India 171 and placing the primary fault on Boeing. He quotes the example of the ANA Flight 985. However, if you go into ANA Flight 985, it had Rolls-Royce engines and a Rolls-Royce FADEC, and that's not the same as the GE engines and the GE FADEC on the Air India flight. So you ask, what's the relevance to the crash? Well, in that case, none at all. And we are doing an episode tomorrow on both the GE and the Rolls-Royce FADECs, so you might want to tune into that.
Good point. So David Craig, I9U or L9U, remember, 1/3 of Pakistan International Airlines pilots were found to be not qualified to fly. They had cheated on their tests to become pilots, mainly through corruption. I suspect a similar situation in India. And there's a BBC report that he's referring to, and we'll give you a link to it in the description below. 2 new reports have found that pilots faked license qualifications while others flew drunk. The news questions the safety of one of the world's fastest growing airline markets. Airline authorities caught 57 pilots over the alcohol limit in the past 2 years, but only 11 lost their jobs, according to the Times of India. In response to the news, the country's Directorate of Civil Aviation has instituted new rules requiring intoxicated pilots to be grounded for 3 months on the first offence and to lose their licence forever after the second. Again, there's a link to this story in the description below. It's a BBC News story. So, Richard, some thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, in Pakistan, following the accident of PIA Flight 8303, it was back in May 2020, an investigation found that 262 out of 860 pilot licenses were faked. This represents roughly 30% of the active licensed pilots nationwide, but that's across PIA and all other operators in Pakistan. Of those, around 141 were employed by PIA, and they were suspended pending further inquiry. And whether the figure in India is similar is pure speculation. There was a scandal in 2011 after an Indigo pilot was arrested for using forged mark sheets. And out of roughly 1,700 ATPLs and 6,300 CPL licenses reviewed, 15 cases were identified involving faked mark sheets. And those 15 cases also had forged logbook entries. And of those 15, 11 pilots were arrested and licenses were suspended based on the investigations. Now, under Indian aviation regulation, each pilot has to undergo a pre-flight breathalyzer test before any scheduled flight departing from India. And they have a zero tolerance rule. So if your breathalyzer is in any way indicating alcohol, you will get banned. The initial first offence is a 3-month license suspension. A second offence is up to 3 years suspension. And a third violation is a permanent ban and license cancellation. And crew members, including pilots, are prohibited from using mouthwash, tooth gels, perfumes, or other products containing alcohol in order to make sure there aren't any false positives. And the report, 57 pilots failing the breathalyzer test, is accurate, and 11 pilots lost their job in the last 2 years, is confirmed by official sources. And Reuters also reports the remainder were disciplined by airlines typically with grounding up to 3 months, fines, and pay cuts.
Yeah, it's not a very encouraging record, is it? So K Clock 9057. I have seen numerous posts on YouTube with bits and pieces of this information on Air India, but this was a comprehensive summary. Thank you. I've been wondering since the first days after this tragic crash if Air India, the Indian government's poor handling of the investigation, including sending in heavy equipment to scoop up the wreckage before the investigation could even begin, was a sign of assumed culpability, that Air India thought the most likely cause was a maintenance issue that would point out their many failings. That the investigation seemed to point to pilot intent might have been unanticipated on their part, and unlike other governments, including Egypt and China, they may be relieved to point to the pilot instead of having to take the blame themselves. Richard.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of finger pointing and blame game going on, and they all pull in their various experts, and some prefer to blame the pilot, the others the operator, others the manufacturer, some the airport authorities, or any other cause they can find, which fits with their political and commercial interests. And my view is the cause, or the causes, plural, of this crash can only be established with clear and irrefutable evidence, and it has to be established beyond any reasonable doubt. And all of these articles pointing fingers and starting the blame game are really just not helpful in that process. And we read every day someone saying, oh, it was Boeing, oh, it was Air India, oh, it was the maintenance, oh, it was the bird strike at the airport. Just wandering all over the place, but not actually coming to any firm conclusion based on evidence.
Square Eyes has got a rather long point to make here, Richard. He says, when the report said the rat deployed immediately after liftoff, that can only be interpreted as being instantly at the point of rotation. Immediately is not an arbitrary word meaning anything other than instantly, like claiming that immediately means after the timestamp indication of the fuel cutoff switches being activated, or to suit any audience's preferred narrative. Immediately means before the cutoff switches were indicated to have been activated. Immediately means the very moment the wheels left the ground, which suggests there was already a developing problem due to the extraordinarily long roll down the runway. The implications of the report suggesting pilot human factors without explicitly saying so is shaped narrative to move responsibility away from Boeing or Air India. If the pilot wanted to commit suicide on takeoff, surely it would be faster and more direct to simply push the yoke controls forward to dive the plane into the ground when there would have been no intervention possible or argument over twiddling with the cutoff switches. The claim of startle effect is ridiculous in a situation where life is just about to end. If there were a cascade of system failures, false messages, and a pathway in correcting a soon-to-be catastrophic situation is not according to standard procedure, or those standard procedures are not working, then I would presume every possible means to restore proper operations would have been actively explored in that short window available to them. I don't think they would have simply have sat there, stunned, eyes glazed, and the preliminary report deliberately withheld critical information to obscure what really happened and to shape a narrative to move blame onto the pilots. So what do you think of that, Richard?
Yeah, well, first of all, the word immediately is used 3 times in the preliminary report, and the word means as soon as possible in the given context. The first time it's used, the aircraft was operating Flight 171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick and crashed at about 0809 immediately after takeoff. Now, we know for a fact this flight lasted 32 seconds. And immediately is, in this context, of a 9 hour flight. So 32 seconds is immediately in the context of a 9 hour flight. The second time it's used, the aircraft achieved maximum speed of 180 knots at 08:08:42, and immediately thereafter, engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned. So here we're talking about 1 second, and that is immediately in the context of timing given to the nearest second. And then we're told a bit later on the CCTV footage shows the RAM air turbine getting deployed immediately after liftoff. And we know it was within 2 to 3 seconds after takeoff. And that is immediately in the context of a initial climb, which typically takes 75 seconds to 1,500 feet. My problem with all these immediatelys is we know from the FDR data the exact time, so we don't have to be vague or non-specific. We can just state the exact time things happened, and it would be much more helpful for the preliminary report to do that. Now, as to the startle effect being ridiculous, well, the startle effect is explicitly recognized in aviation accident investigations, and especially in the context of pilot performance under sudden, unexpected events. It has been highlighted in both accident reports and guidance materials issued by the FAA, the EASA, ICAO, and NTSB and BEAR and other investigative bodies. So I don't think it's ridiculous to talk about the startle effect.
So Richard McQuaskey, 1949. Happy birthday, Mr. Godfrey. Since there are only 13 candles shown on the birthday cake, I can only assume that Mr. Thomas is saving the rest of them for your whisper result celebrations and your next birthday.
That's a nice thought. And Richard, we try not to burn all of our candles at once.
No. So David Iller, 5961. You guys seem to give the most correct information on the net. Thank you. I have not been able to verify, but assume the 7878 generates three-phase AC electric. I'm also assuming that the VSFGs need three-phase power to restart the engines, even during a low-speed windmill start, which could be provided by the RAT, 10-second delay for needed power to restart, or APU up to 90 seconds. Is it even possible for a windmill engine restart off battery alone? Could the delay in adequate power, RAT up to speed, factor into the fuel switch transition timing? How does the FADEC logic work with loss or absence of three-phase power for restart? One engine flameout would be a different scenario, with the FADEC immediately sensing three-phase power from the working engine, resulting in minimal restart delay. Have you talked about power needed for relight and the timing of the RAT needed to be up to speed to produce that power, and if both engines can be started off the RAT simultaneously, and if that might explain the delay in transitioning fuel switches back on and why they turned on 4 seconds apart, because this was being dictated by when power was available. It's a complex question.
That's a very interesting analysis. So let's go through it. The engine speed N2 needs to be at least 8% and better, more like 15% to drive the VFSG in generator mode with any meaningful output. And for a restart, you need 15 to 25% N2 in order to be able to introduce fuel and successfully restart an engine. Now, on the point about windmills starting, at below 250 knots IAS, N2 windmill RPM will often be too low for self-sustaining generation. And Boeing recommends 300 knots. And the preliminary report says the maximum speed was 180 knots. So I think windmill starting is not likely. The battery power is sufficient on its own until the RAT comes online, providing stable electric power. The battery, however, can only support one engine restart at a time. It cannot support dual simultaneous engine restart. As soon as the RAT comes online, it can support dual simultaneous engine start. And they would also auto start the APU, which is a backup. But without the APU, the battery and the RAT provide sufficient power.
On the same, talking of engines, Richard, Brenda Smith, VX8XF Foxtrot, says 2.9 megawatts. Are you sure? Sounds like an awful lot of power.
Yeah, it is an awful lot of electrical power. And let me break it down for you, Brenda. So each engine, GENX1B, has two VFSGs, variable frequency starter generators. And each VFSG can produce 250 kVA at 235 volt AC and variable frequency. And per engine, you've got 2 times 250 kVA, that's 500 kVA. You've got two engines, so that's 1,000 kVA. And a kVA is not exactly identical to a kilowatt, so you have to have a power factor of, say, 0.85 or 0.9. And that's from just the engine mounted VFSGs. In addition, you've got APU VFSGs with similar 250 kVA units. And then there are two large backup generators on each of the engine spools. So when you add it all up, the total installed generation capacity comes to 2.9 megawatts. And that is double the Boeing 777.
A lot of power.
A lot of
So,
power.
tracks of NYC, that's New York. Can we scream any louder for the need to install cameras inside the cockpit? All of the speculations, theories, guesses, etc. would be nixed by installing a camera. Most locomotives across the country are equipped with inward and outward facing cameras. That I take as the United States. In the event of a crash or mishap, everything can be reviewed instantly. Again, I ask, why doesn't the aviation industry require cameras in the cockpit?
Well, it's a long debate going on between the manufacturers and the regulators and the pilots' unions, and we have been through this debate before. And let me just summarize it for you again. So the pilot unions have expressed privacy concerns. They fear that CCTV footage could be leaked to sensationalist media and pilots might end up getting judged by the media unfairly. So they cite the privacy violations, misinterpretations, surveillance misuse, and the potential chilling effect on pilot performance. And ICAO and other regulatory bodies have offered compromises and safeguards, but this is only still in the discussion stage, and there's a huge debate going on in the industry on this subject.
Yes, it's a very interesting subject, and certainly you can understand the pilot's views on this. With so many things leaking these days, it could be a real challenge, that one. It's a very good point though. So viewers, that's all we've got time for today. We are going to come back tomorrow for a detailed analysis of the FADEC on the 787-8 powered by Gen X engines. And so please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those comments coming. We love them. We love your support. And do keep those fabulous questions coming in as well. And Richard, thank you very much indeed for your analysis on these questions today from our viewers.
You're very welcome.
And please, viewers, do tune in tomorrow. We'd love your company. Thank you.